Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today we have another interesting story. Estibaliz Carranza was born in Mexico. She grew up in a poor family. When the girl was 5 years old, her parents decided to move to Spain, specifically to Barcelona, to seek a better life there. Esti will later remember her early childhood fondly, emphasizing that although she grew up in a poor family, she did not starve and always had a quiet corner to sleep in, while her family was loving and warm. Although Esti's parents are educated, her father is a psychologist, her mother an interpreter, their situation as immigrants is very difficult, and they barely make ends meet, especially during the first few years. Esti's parents grasp at anything, even low-paying jobs, as long as they can support themselves and their children, as well as their mother's sister, who lives with them and is mentally ill, and their grandmother, whose health is deteriorating more and more due to her age. The apartment that Esti's family has at that time is 50 square meters in size. It is then that Esti encounters the special strictness of her father, who demands compliance and absolute obedience from both her and her brother. It is only years later that Esti is able to understand the enormous burden of responsibility that rested on her parents' shoulders at the time, but she has the impression that this time left an extremely negative mark on her. That it was then that she learned to hide her problems in order not to burden her parents with them additionally. It was then that, in reaction to the harm done to her, she perpetuated in herself a certain unfavorable pattern of behavior, namely submissiveness and concealment of emotions. It was to turn out that this would fundamentally affect her life. At the age of 17, she meets her first boyfriend. She is very much in love with him. They are together for several years. It is obvious to Esti that when she finishes her education, the boy will marry her and they will start an independent life together. Her parents see it differently. In their opinion, the boy is not serious about a relationship with their daughter, which they feel is due to the fact that he himself comes from a much higher social class. They try to draw their daughter's attention to what bothers them, but she is deaf and blind to any arguments. When Esti receives her diploma, she gains a serious conversation with her boyfriend and asks him when the wedding will be. Her beloved explains that he never had such plans for her. It finally comes to Esti that for years she has been living on illusions. Their relationship is falling apart. This is a huge shock for Esti. She can't eat, she can't sleep. She feels that there is only emptiness around her. She experiences such a state for the first time in her life. At the same time, she feels that something alien and evil is taking control of her, as if some director has taken a place in her head and started controlling her thoughts. Esti completely seriously considers how she could take her ex-boyfriend's life, such as damaging the brakes on his car. These thoughts haunt her for weeks, but Esti chooses not to put them into action. Also, the strange state in which the girl finds herself is slowly subsiding, although she continues to find it very hard and feels that she has not yet stopped loving her boyfriend. And just then comes a proposal from her parents' friends living in Germany, that she should come to them and try to find a job there. At first, she could live with them before trying to become independent. As it seems, this is the perfect moment. Esti immediately decides to leave. The girl first works as an au pair in Munich, and later finds a job at an ice cream shop in a small village near Nuremberg. There she meets Holger, a 36-year-old door-to-door salesman, who shows up at her workplace in this role. Holger offers her a date, to which Esti immediately agrees. But practically from the start, having learned from her previous experience, she makes it clear if the acquaintance starts to work out, she wants a wedding because she wants to be taken seriously. Holger agrees, and he keeps his word. They get married a few months after their acquaintance. The ceremony takes place in a small circle with only a few friends, as Holger and Esti's families boycott the ceremony, considering the young couple's decision thoughtless and hasty. The couple soon moves to Berlin, Holger's hometown, where Esti again takes a job at an ice cream shop, this time as a waitress. The work gives her satisfaction, but married life is not going well. Esti feels that she is too often criticized by her husband and that she has no say in the relationship. The woman increasingly thinks that the decision to marry was indeed too hasty. Holger works at various jobs. He changes jobs very often, as none of them give him satisfaction. For this reason, an idea comes to him, which he shares with his wife. They will move to Vienna, open their own ice cream shop there, and soon think about starting a family. Esti is happy and at this point really believes that everything between her and Holger will work out. Very quickly they manage to find a place to rent at a reasonable price and suitable for these purposes. The premises lie on the outskirts of Vienna. It belongs to a room that is admittedly a warehouse, but as you can see from the description, it will be easy to convert it into a residential unit. Holger and Esti quickly decide to sign the contract. After moving to Vienna, the couple is absorbed in the work of setting up the ice cream shop and apartment for a while, but soon after opening the salon, it turns out that the peace was only apparent, as conflicts return and even with redoubled force. The business does go very well, but this is mainly due to Esti, who works almost beyond her strength, while Holger mostly lounges on the couch or takes up his new hobby of collecting all sorts of guns. It particularly hurts Esti that Holger persistently pushes off plans for a child into the indefinite future, despite having promised it himself and despite knowing how much she cares. The arguments that recur over and over again against this background have the effect of making the spouses increasingly estranged from each other. Thus, they have a fundamental influence on the fact that in 2007, Esti gets involved in an affair. Manfred is, as Holger once was, a sales representative. Esti met him shortly after opening her own salon. Holger, by the way, always tried to flirt with her, but she consistently rebuffed his advances. But now that the atmosphere in her marriage has deteriorated so significantly, Esti starts an affair with Manfred. The support she receives from him gives her the strength to make the decision to divorce. The decision is eventually mutual, and as a result, in early 2008, the divorce is decided. The couple still lives together until Holger finds a new place to live. Living together in this situation turns out to be even more difficult than imagined. Holger becomes very aggressive and uses psychological violence against his wife, constantly telling her that she is hopeless, that she doesn't understand how he could have married her, and that she won't make it in life without him. Esti, as in the past, feels as if paralyzed at such moments and is unable to speak a word in her defense, even though she feels something like contempt for herself for doing so. And then the director comes to the fore again, who, just as he did years ago in Spain, wants, as it were, on her behalf, to annihilate the man hurting her. For a long time, these are only thoughts, and Esti, as before, does not take any action towards the realization of this plan. But soon comes the moment when the boundary is crossed. One April day, when Holger insults Esti again during an argument, the woman takes one of his guns, points the gun barrel straight at her husband's head, and fires 3 shots. After the act, Esti looks at Holger's body leaning back in his chair and can't believe that what just took place actually happened. She takes a shower, then goes to her friend's place for the night, and the next morning immediately goes to work. Only in the afternoon does she go to her apartment, hoping incomprehensibly that everything will be as before, and she will find Holger there, alive. Opening the door to the apartment, Esti even spells reality, repeating to herself that everything will be as before. But when she notices Holger sitting motionless in an armchair, in the same position as the day before, it occurs to her that she has killed him. She now knows only one thing. She doesn't want to be here now. Esti moves to her friend's house for a few days. Since being away from home for a long time is difficult for practical reasons, the woman finally goes there again. As she approaches the building, she has the same thoughts as a few days earlier, that she will find Holger alive. Unfortunately, this is not the case. In addition, already at the gate, the smell of a decomposing body can be smelled. Esti realizes that something irreversible has happened and that she must act, and as soon as possible. She purchases an electric saw at a DIY store. What takes place later is horror in its purest form. Esti cuts Holger's body into pieces, then puts them one by one into the freezer located in the apartment. Holger's body parts lie in the freezer for several months. The disgusting smell emanating from there gradually becomes unbearable. Using various air fresheners doesn't help, and it slowly dawns on Esti that she can no longer delay what she is afraid to even think about: removing Holger's rotting body parts and moving them to another place. So one day she brings 7 plastic ice tubs, the kind she uses in her living room, into the apartment, puts on housework gloves, and opens the freezer. As she later recalls, she doesn't know what was worse: cutting up Holger's corpse with a saw, or opening his grave months later and taking out more of his body parts from there. But Esti has to finish what she started, so she puts each of them in a plastic garbage bag and then into a tub. She has already poured liquid concrete into the tubs. Now she sinks the packages into it. At the very bottom of the freezer lies Holger's head and torso. These body parts Esti is unable to touch, so she pours the liquid concrete into the freezer, then immediately closes it. One by one, she carries the tubs to the basement located under her living room. To do so, she has to leave the building and walk a piece along a busy street. None of the passers-by, of course, are interested in what Esti is transporting, but for herself, knowing what she is carrying is very stressful. To move the freezer to the basement, Esti already has to engage workers. She explains to them that some mischievous customer deliberately destroyed her freezer, and she now has to preserve it as evidence in the case. None of the workers get suspicious. Esti soon moves to a new apartment, as she cannot imagine continuing to stay in the place where Holger died. Esti tells neighbors, friends, and employees that Holger went abroad. This is quite likely, as Holger was actually planning to go to India after his separation from Esti and was telling everyone around him about it. Esti has been seeing Manfred all this time, who of course has no idea what has happened and is also convinced that Holger has left. In 2009, Esti and Manfred move in together, and it is from that moment that something in their relationship, which has been successful so far, begins to break down, and Esti has the impression that Manfred behaves similarly to Holger. He criticizes her appearance, her behavior. He begins to cheat on her without even particularly hiding it. Esti becomes depressed and even goes to a psychiatrist, where she talks about her home situation. The doctor advises her to part ways with this man. Esti notices that the director appears in her head again, and with increasing frequency. Esti tries to silence him, explaining to herself that this will only make things worse. But Manfred's betrayals hurt her terribly. On the night of November 21st, 2010, one of many arguments takes place. When Manfred goes to bed a short time later, Esti, feeling mentally exhausted, begs him to make one last attempt and to stop cheating on her. He in turn replies, "Esti, understand at last that I need these women, because you alone cannot give me what they give me." And at this moment, the director wins. Esti runs to the hallway to get the gun, which is still there, and fires 4 shots into the back of Manfred's head. By hiding the body now, Esti acts a little differently, as she can already benefit from the experience she has gained. First of all, she doesn't delay what awaits her one way or another, and when the day comes, she goes to the market to buy plastic painter's film. At home, before she picks up the saw, she carefully spreads the film on the floor and walls of the apartment. She packs Manfred's dissected body parts into plastic bags, his torso into a suitcase on wheels. She then cleans the apartment for a couple of hours before moving the packed body parts to the basement under her living room, hiding them in the large freezer standing there. She is completely exhausted. She calls her brother in Barcelona and complains to him that she is heartbroken because Manfred has left her. A few weeks later, a criminal police official knocks on her door. He explains his visit by saying that Manfred's family doesn't believe that a man could just leave like that without saying goodbye to them. Esti explains that Manfred was doing some shady business with Albanians and Russians, which, by the way, corresponds to the truth. Perhaps this very fact is why the police never show up at Esti's house again. 6 weeks after Manfred's murder, Esti moves in with the next man in her life. It's 47-year-old Roland, whom she already knew because he was an acquaintance of Manfred's. Roland married at a very young age, and the marriage quickly produced children. Over time, however, he and his wife grew distant from each other, which led to their decision to separate. After the divorce, they remained friends. For 9 years, Roland was in a new relationship, which ended when he began an affair with Esti. The man is 15 years older than her, but they understand each other as if this age difference did not exist. Everything between them works out perfectly, and 6 months later, to mutual joy, Esti learns that she is pregnant and goes crazy with happiness. A child, after all, is the dream of her life, impossible to realize until now, since each of her partners, even when things were still going relatively well between them, had pushed these plans back to the future. And then, as far as Holger and Manfred were concerned, they were no longer feasible for known reasons. The day of May 25, 2011 is a great holiday for Esti, and the following days are also filled with unimaginable joy. The future appears in happy colors, but this happy time ends unexpectedly quickly, almost 2 weeks later precisely. June 6, 2011 is a rainy Monday. There are few customers in the salon, so it is clear that the staff will manage perfectly well. Esti greatly appreciates such quieter days, as she can then go to her apartment, located nearby, and do something there, or just relax. This is the case this time too. Esti goes out, as usual, through the back exit. She notices a man in a work suit carrying some tools in both hands. Her attention is drawn to the fact that the man looks as if he is very concerned about something. In addition, when Esti says good morning to him, the man doesn't respond. This seems very strange to her, but the woman soon forgets about it. At home, she takes care of some small errands, also prepares dinner for Roland, and looks forward to the evening they are to spend together. Pushing out of consciousness, around 18 o'clock, Roland comes home. He immediately shares the news. Something happened at Erkan's barbershop. The place is full of police, and the area in front of the entrance is fenced off with tape. Erkan is a hairdresser whose service premises lie in the immediate vicinity of Esti's salon. Roland expresses his suspicion that some kind of burglary has taken place there. And this is the moment when Esti feels that anxiety is beginning to overtake her. Actually, she could go outside and try to find out more, but she gives up. She makes a resolution not to just think about it. At the same time, the woman vaguely realizes that her mechanism for repressing what is uncomfortable has just been activated. Esti and her partner spend the evening pleasantly making plans for the near future. Even before the baby is born, they want to move to a row house on the edge of town. The next morning, Esti and Roland get up early. When Roland leaves for work, they say goodbye with a tender kiss. Esti goes to her living room as usual at 9. She notices that a gray station wagon with tinted windows is parked at an intersection, with 2 men sitting inside. It occurs to Esti that it is a police car. She is overwhelmed with increasing fear. Sitting at one of the tables in the salon is her neighbor Erkan, the owner of the barbershop. He casually greets her. Then he adds that there is a terrible commotion at his place, because a sewer pipe has burst, and now they are looking for the source of the damage throughout the basement. Esti is as if paralyzed, but takes to work as usual. Not much time passes, and another neighbor appears in the living room. He pulls Esti aside and asks her in a half voice if she already knows what happened. And since Esti doesn't, the neighbor says that a man's corpse was found in the basement of the premises next door, and that it is said to be Manfred. Esti wants only one thing, for it to turn out to be just a bad dream. For another moment she seems to be deluded, but suddenly one of her employees comes up to her and says that people are gossiping that she, Esti, is the one who killed Manfred. Esti is terrified, but instinct tells her to run away. Outside is full of police. Esti tries to collect her thoughts. She succeeds only partially, but Esti knows one thing: to escape, she needs money. So it is imperative that she go to her bank, and as soon as possible, before the news of what she has done even gets there. But suddenly Esti realizes that she has left the passbook and the money in the living room. She calls the cleaner, a Serbian woman who has been working for her for several years. They trust each other and are friends. They make an appointment in town. Esti gives her the keys to the safe and asks her to take out and bring the 2 items. Esti has no idea if the Serbian woman has heard any rumors, but she trusts her. And indeed, in some time, the woman returns, handing Esti the booklet and the money. Esti orders a cab and goes to the airport. When she gets there, she chalks a few words on a piece of paper to Roland, begging him to come to Schwechat Airport as soon as possible and call the phone number given. It's the phone number with the prepaid card she bought in the meantime. Esti asks the cab driver to deliver the card to the specified address in Schwechat. Esti looks through flight schedules in a panic. At the window, she asks about the nearest last-minute flight. It's a flight to Paris. The woman buys a ticket to Paris and books a flight from Paris to Mexico. Her phone rings. Roland is already at the airport. Esti falls into his arms. After a moment, she explains that she has to leave immediately. Roland doesn't understand anything. Esti realizes that she does not want to tell him the real reasons for her departure. She explains that she is flying to Spain because her father suddenly fell ill. Roland, however, senses that something is amiss here. He asks why she telephoned him only now and who gave her the information and how. Esti refuses to explain further and asks him not to ask anything more. She only adds that she wants to protect him, as something horrible has happened. She kisses him goodbye and leaves. When she is left alone again, she tries to sort out her thoughts. It suddenly occurs to her that when she gets to Paris or later to Mexico, she might be arrested by the police. It occurs to her that it would be easier to hide somewhere in the country. Esti counts on at least gaining some time, because deep down she realizes that the situation is lost and that her life so far is over forever. The woman orders a cab and asks for a ride to Western Station. There she buys something to eat, then makes more purchases: dark glasses that cover half her face, wide pants, and comfortable shoes. It's already 5 p.m. and Esti realizes that she should leave Vienna as soon as possible. So she orders a cab to the bus station. The driver has the radio on. The news begins. The first is that 2 dismembered male bodies were found in the basement of a house standing in the Meidling district during renovation work. Esti's head begins to spin. She hears nothing more. She gets off at the bus station, but is afraid that she will be exposed buying a ticket or taking the bus. She decides to order a cab and take it to Carinthia, even though it's sure to be an expensive ride. But it won't be far from that state to Italy, and there, who knows, she might be able to hide. Esti asks a cab driver to take her across the border to Italy. Surprisingly, this succeeds without a problem. No one demands to show documents. They reach a small village called Carnia. Esti asks the cab driver to book a room for her in his name. She tells him directly that she has problems with the police and doesn't want to take any chances. The cab driver complies with her request. Esti gets a room numbered 13, which seems to her a macabre joke. The next day, Esti takes a bus to a larger city, Udine. There she stops a young man on the street. He is a street musician, playing guitar and hanging out with some strange types. Esti invites him in for coffee, then tells him a made-up story about being beaten by her husband and how she had to run away from home because of it. She actually invites herself into his apartment this way. The musician gives himself up for mercy and, although very reluctantly, agrees to let Esti live with him for a few days. One evening, Esti asks a man to give them his phone for a while, as she wants to read the news. The woman searches it for information about herself. All the newspapers write about her. Is Estibaliz C in Mexico? The murderess cut the bodies of her victims into 4.5-kilogram parts. Esti doesn't know how to erase the phone's search history, but she's sure that the phone's owner won't even think about it. so she gives the phone back to him and goes to bed. As it turns out, this assumption was wrong. The next morning, the police show up at the apartment. It is exactly June 10th, 2011. 6 months later, while Esti is in prison awaiting her trial, her son is born. The child is returned to his father. In March, on the prison grounds, Esti and Roland get married. An expert psychiatrist diagnoses Esti with narcissistic personality disorder, rules that Esti is particularly dangerous, and that she was fundamentally sane during the commission of the crime. In November 2012, Esti is sentenced to life imprisonment. In prison, Esti gives interviews, publishes books, and goes to great lengths to ensure that the media does not forget her, which she fully succeeds in doing. This behavior is criticized even by her husband, Roland, stating that business should not be done on the dead. Esti divorces him, moreover, soon, and enters into an affair with inmate Martin L. This relationship is also talked about for months. The two plan a wedding. In the end, however, it doesn't happen. And in July 2019, the woman announces officially that she is separating from him. Esti, who turns 41 in September 2019, however, will certainly not let the media forget about her. This is the end of this story. Thank you for listening to the end. Goodbye.